Welcome to Collaborate and Elevate, Volume 8, Mental Health Innovation. Give yourself a round of applause. Thank you. I want to give everyone a shout out. SJ, Alex for video production, and Ezra assisting on music. The nachos and the awesomeness with it was provided by High Poke. Has anyone ever been to High Poke before? By a show of hands. Okay. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce Reed with Mental Rise. Reed, thank you.
Thanks, Manny. Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming out to Mental Health Innovate, Collaborate and Elevate, Volume 8, Mental Health Innovation. So, hold on.
Also, there's a lot of seats in the front, too, if people want to come up, move a little bit forward. Megan Holstein, there's a seat up here. Darius, you could come up a little more, just a little bit more. A lot of seats here. Abe, there's a seat over here. I saw you squinting. Yeah. All right, here you go.
Now we have people really close. Great. So, welcome to Collaborate and Elevate, Volume 8, Mental Health Innovation. We're going to have two panels, and we're going to cover some stories from entrepreneurs and innovators who have personal mental health journeys. All of those people have taken those experiences into the work that they do today. Some of them have made businesses out of that, and some of them have impacted lives through the work that they're doing. Well, all of them have. Our second panel will be focused on investing in mental health, and we'll talk about why and how people should invest in mental health in the workplace and beyond, and highlight some of the innovations that are happening in our community relative to that. So without further ado, we'll start with the first panel. Slater, you want to walk up? Yeah, Slater and Chris, Rachel, everybody else. Comfy? Yeah, no pressure. So, welcome to this panel is called Mental Health and Innovation, how our mental health journeys empower us, how our mental health journeys challenge us and empower us as entrepreneurs and innovators. So we have a panel full of entrepreneurs and innovators, and it's time to introduce them. So if you guys can take a moment to introduce yourself, we'll just start with.
Thank you, Reed. Thank you for all of you for being here, and also thank you for my fellow panelists. It's very humbling. I know some of you, and I've learned a little bit about the rest of you, and it's pretty awesome to be up here. So I'm Wolf. A lot of you know me from the Small Business Beanstalk, which is a company I ran for about 10 years. Others know me from festival productions like the Food Truck Fest, Independence Day, things like that. Currently, I'm with Atlas Partners, and our job in a nutshell is to tell the Columbus story to the rest of the world and bring all of their resources back here to make us better. So, yeah, that's me.
I'm Rachel Bertner, and I do yoga in the community. I am a mental health consciousness person where I work with the Body Reconnection to bring that into a conscious community. And I coach throughout the community working on energetics and how to actually help people that are raising or changing their perspective and consciousness in the community still integrate with everybody else as they're respecting their own part in the journey. So I do a lot of coaching, a lot of educating, and I'm a trauma educator in the community.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Bill Taylor. I am an IT professional. I have made my living in the public sector for over 20 years. And part of that was certainly driven by the things I grew up with, the things I saw, and part of my own mental health journey. So I'm pleased to be here. I appreciate Reed and everyone here to help me discuss this. I'm going to be talking about some third-person things that have occurred in my life as opposed to first person, right? I don't know you well enough, but if you do another one of these, Maybe we'll go to second person. And we could go to first person. But thank you very much. Looking forward to discussing.
Hey everyone, my name's Slater Meehan. I'm the COO at Ticketfire. I'm a Columbus transplant. I moved here about 2.5 years ago from California, part of a program called Venture for America that brings recent college grads to communities and startups like Columbus. Columbus is not a startup. In some ways it is, but yeah, I'm really excited to be part of this panel, and thank you, Reed.
Glad to be with you guys, and good to see you guys tonight. My name is Chris McAllister with SiteShift, and learned the hard way over a decade ago that when you go through extreme winning and losing, you can lose your identity when it's wrapped up in your business. So we love to help leaders either future-proof that as they can get out and think about who they are, or when they're stuck and restless, how to figure that out in this moment now. So look forward to talking about that with you guys.
Awesome, thank you. And I'm Reed. I founded a company called Rise, and we are transforming the way that people interact with the mental health system by providing proactive opportunities through the Mental Fitness Studio. So that is why I'm up here. And yeah, I'd like to just start off by whatever level you guys are comfortable sharing, talking about what your mental health journey has been so far, what that's meant to you, and just kind of level set with that. Start off, Chris?
Right on. For me, it was 11 years ago. I'm 30 years old at that point, and I'm sitting on the deck of our house, and I'm holding an eviction notice after my wife and I had already custom-built 2 homes. And I thought, like, oh, if you get this certain level of success, it'll be enough. And had the real assets of 7 figures, and it wasn't enough. And then the real estate crisis hit, got caught in that, and I've got 6 figures of loss, and we're about to get evicted from a house that we're renting. And I'm like, if I can't keep us in this house, what am I really worth? And I had a mindset opportunity where my mind literally was able to conceive of, there's Chris, and there's what he does in his relationships. And most people haven't thought about their life that way, but that happened for me at that moment. And it was super profound because in that loss, I actually checked the suicide clause on my life insurance. When you wrap up who you are and what you do, and you lose that, the rug has gotten pulled out from underneath you. So at that moment when I was able to conceive of, I can feel the same about myself, whether we stay or go in this house, everything oriented for me out of that moment. So there's Chris, and then there's the roles he fulfills. And when that happened, I just haven't gotten over that idea. And I just keep coming back to it all the time. Even being with you here tonight, there's me, and then there's the role I'm fulfilling. And knowing the difference between those two means I get to be who I am regardless of the winning or losing. And we've developed practices around that, and those practices are the ways that I keep returning back to remind myself that I am more than my thoughts, my actions, my stories, my wins, my losses. And it feels like complete freedom that I get to relearn every day. Not perfect, but in motion.
Awesome, let's bounce over to Wolf. Mix it up.
Thanks. So my journey has been very interesting. It's had a lot of ebbs and flows. I've never been in a situation as tough as some of our friends and some of our friends here, but it's still a struggle. And it's one where when things really test you, it gets hard. And entrepreneurship is probably the strongest version of that test that I've ever been through. When you not only have to worry about paying your own bills, but then you have to worry about paying your employees' bills, and everybody who cares about you put everything that they have into your idea, and you don't know what to do on a Wednesday going towards a Friday where everything is due. And then that racks up every 2 weeks, month after month, year after year. It takes the underlying concerns, because I don't think anyone is fully mentally fit. And I think that the ones who believe that they fully are are probably the furthest from self-realization. But I think that we put ourselves in situations, both by choice and by reality, to test our barriers. And I definitely tested mine. I've never been one to consider myself suicidal, but every single counselor I've ever met has told me that through a series of questions, I should probably be concerned. The biggest thing for me has always been I don't really have a fear of death, which has just been an ongoing thing. Like it's, oh, if this plane goes down, I've had a good go at it. Everybody will be fine. I've made sure that my companies will go and do whatever they want. But I'm told that's a really terrifying sign. And so I'm just here to discuss some different coping mechanisms I've had to develop for myself so that when I'm in those most stressful and painful times, I'm able to snap myself out of sort of the spiral going down and get back up to the leader I need to be in order to protect those people who invested their time and their lives into me.
Yeah, thank you, Wolf. Thank you, Chris. I think it's hard to follow both of those. You guys have obviously spent a lot of time thinking about this, and my mental health journey has been one that's been shorter, but it's also been very intense. A lot of my life wrapped up when I was young was around soccer. So that's what I was passionate about. That's what I spent every moment thinking about. And so I played growing up, I played in college, and as soon as I finished playing soccer in college, I felt like this weight lifted off my chest. And only at that moment did I realize how hard I was on myself to be the best soccer player I could be, to a really negative standpoint where I could tell it affected my friendships, affected my own success. And that was a really big, it's kind of like one of those moments, right? Where you just start seeing the world in a different lens. And at that moment, I realized that I am way, way too hard on myself. Like I have this negative self-talk that goes on. So when I moved to Columbus, and that was kind of like finishing soccer, I had this moment of honeymoon. And everything was fun and everything was beautiful, and there was this amazing new community that I was getting, to be a part of. But then slowly in the last year or so, everything, the weight of relationships, the weight of my own work at Ticketfire starts to build up and build up and build up, and I have more negative self-talk. And actually, recently I've been going to a counselor, and the number one thing that she's pinpointed a lot of my mental struggle with is shame. I have a lot of shame in what I do. And so luckily, I think as Wolf said, I haven't had severe cases of mental trauma, but it's something I think about and I continue to think about and want to take action on. So that's the quick story to my mental journey. I have a couple things about coaching, but I think we'll save that later on.
So my journey has to do with my body. My trauma was abuse. And so for me, my big thing was I understood why I was afraid of people. It all made sense. It was all very logical, and I understood it. And I could do all the counseling, all the treatments, all the medications, all that kind of stuff, but my body wasn't satisfied with it. And I wanted to know how to move through space, and how to move through the space of Columbus when I am then starting to help my peers, my friends, my ex-therapist. I'm doing all these new age yoga, body reconnection things, but I am walking around and my body is having reactions around people who it's terrified of. And so for me, my mental health was actually in direct conflict with my body trying to tell me things that we didn't agree. So for me, my whole thing has been working with empowering people that you become somebody completely different after all of these circumstances, and that there's all these roles that I've had or somebody has labeled me with having, and then there's one that I've never had because I'm not there yet. So for me, a big thing that I started working with is the aiming. Where am I aiming at, and what does that person feel like? And actually coming into a sensory experience. A lot of my teachers, I don't know if anybody is familiar with Bessel van der Kolk or any of the people that actually talk about the body and its trauma. And so my approach has always been in mental health to actually notice how I feel, and to make sure that I'm somebody that actually is making sure that other people feel good and that we're noticing that around each other to make sure that it's a healing environment. It's been a part of my journey.
Thank you, Rachel. Don't tell anyone. Okay? So from the early ages, that was an unknown understanding in our household. Don't tell anyone about your schizophrenic paranoid brother. Don't tell anyone about your, back then it was manic depressive, but it became bipolar, right? The diagnosis of your sister. Don't tell anyone, all right? Now, it wasn't said, but it was understood. It was the way things were. People would ask about my oldest brother, and yeah, he's in California. And that would be it. And the people in my hometown actually knew the game, right? Because they had some of this stuff going on. You don't say anything. So as I'm getting older, and I'm starting to deal with my own issues and understanding specifically my brother and sister, but also the prevalence of alcohol and addictive, patterns and so forth, I start feeling like I've got to tell someone about what this is going on. And even to this day, right, I'm 61 years old. I have one living sister, not the, unfortunately, my oldest sister committed suicide. My oldest brother, the paranoid schizophrenic, has been missing since December 2nd, 1999. But I'm with my living sister, and we get into a situation with family, and she is still not telling anyone. You know? And I'm just way more, I'm like, oh yeah, they killed themselves, or, people need to hear what's going on in your life. And this whole experience, when I watched what it did to my mother, listening to her talk to my brother at 3 in the morning on the phone as he's screaming, she's crying, and I'm 10, 11, 12 years old not knowing what the heck's going on. All right, and as I get older, right, I start seeing this behavior not in myself. So I've been pretty blessed but I'm not, to the earlier comment, it's in all of it, right? None of us are mentally fit, but how do you use that and then use that in a positive way in your chosen career and what it is you do? I happen to be good at school. Great benefit, man. Nothing like being good in school because I got to do what I wanted to do. And I use that to excel in school, move on, find a pattern, an occupation that let me, eat, first of all, and try to deal with all the things that I had seen when I was younger.
So for me, my mental health journey started when I was a kid. My family went through a divorce very early on, and I didn't learn how to talk until later on, later than I should have, or later than I was told I should have. I didn't learn how to read until later than I should have. And I constantly had these messaging of not being good enough. And in grade school, I was diagnosed with ADD and prescribed just different types of amphetamines throughout that grade school experience. And I think the most damaging thing was I had to go in between each class and ask a teacher if I was good enough. And they would literally mark down like a good rating or a fair rating or a poor, that type of stuff. And that made me very much internalize that, and it's very tied to the depression I've experienced. And in college, I think my freshman year, I had a couple dreams that I had fall apart, and my grandmother passed away, and all that kind of snowballed into this first period that I had where I was very suicidal. And from that experience, some of my fraternity brothers, which are actually here today, CJ, John, they mentioned like, hey, come to this thing, go to these different activities, events, and that got me out of that scenario. But later on, I realized that other people were feeling that way, and my mental health journey empowered me to reach out to other people. And I started something 6 years ago called Mental Health Matters Week, which was a campaign that raised awareness in the college community. And 3 years ago today was actually the last one that I organized, and we had over 750 volunteers plan and organize that night. So for me, at times my mental health journey has very much challenged me, but in other times it's very much empowered me. After graduating college, I've even gone through different programs where either through meditation or other programs to actually help me improve my mental fitness, the way that I show up at work, the way that I lead teams, and those types of programs. And I've had the fortune to go through Chris's program, which has influenced me greatly in that. And I would like to hear from everybody just a quick blurb, if you would like, about how your mental health journey has empowered you in the work that you do today. You don't have to, but.
I'll make it very simple. It's made me more conscious of how I interact with everybody. The biggest thing which it's done for me is help me remember that every single person is going through something on some level, and each interaction you can have with them can make it either better or worse or neutral. And it's not your responsibility to make it better, but you're a real jerk if you're out there making it worse. And I don't think a lot of people take the time to put themselves second in interactions. And I think that going through the struggles and going through hard times and then going through good times has helped me remember how much those interactions from outside have affected me. And so it helps me remember how to interact with others.
So I remember being the last time I was in treatment for anorexia, and it was my 7th stay, and I had had heart failure again, and no one could help me, and everybody kept saying to me, "You got sick for a reason, you got sick for a reason, you're gonna get better, and you're gonna figure this out, and you're gonna help so many people." And I was actually repeating that story back to the nurse practitioner who said it to me because she became my client years later when I was doing trauma work on her for her body, because I did figure it out. And I did promise that if I could ever figure it out and I could get off medication and I could figure out how to feel powerful and strong in my body and not be awake every night from panic attacks, and I could be around men without freaking out, and I could actually have honest relationships with women again and smile and be happy, that I would never, ever, ever leave the dead for dead, that I would go back and I would help women. And how this has inspired my journey from rehabs to the prisons I've taught in to all of this stuff is that faith and hope and inspiration are the same in any language for anyone who their body feels another person humanize them. So that has inspired me, that I'm inspired to feel real people feel real again or for the first time ever in their life, no matter what any of these stories are. That what gets people when they say, "I want to be dead," is someone who actually looks them in the face and makes them want to feel alive again. So that's what inspires me.
That's beautiful. That really is beautiful. The greatest thing I've learned, and the friendships I count on the most, are the people I know who have suffered, and that I've been a part of trying to help them. All right, I don't get to help in the manner that you do, but being a friend and listening is really important, and knowing some warning signs, knowing when things aren't right, and recognizing that, and getting people out of a situation at that moment to say, "Hey, let's go over here, let's have a cup of coffee," whatever it is. That to me brings me great joy, and I appreciate those friendships with those folks more, and they appreciate mine, right? The fact that, I'm one of the people that calls them back, right? They've had plenty of people who are like, "Oh, so-and-so's on the phone." No, call them back, talk to people, keep them in your thoughts, and that's the best I can do, which is, I'm okay with it. Yeah.
Bumping mics.
Yeah, you know what's next.
When I think about my mental health journey, increasingly I try to think about my control. And that's like the terrible and the great thing of your brain is it's all under your control. And when I tie that to it, how does that empower me? When I think about entrepreneurship, a lot of us, and I think, just from knowing some of you in the crowd, a lot of us are in smaller companies where we have a lot of control over the companies we're in. I think about, okay, if I can meld my brain or transform the way I think about things to be in a more positive light, to, live the life that I want to be with a different shift in a mindset, or to be more understanding, well, I can take that same journey and that same courage and that same power that I got from doing that internally and then apply that to my work as an entrepreneur, where I have full control over changing a company, over creating a product, over making a difference. And so those two intertwine very closely for me, because they're both, something that we can control and change.
For me, what I keep returning back to over and over is a baseline idea. I already told you guys kind of the intense story of sitting on the deck and going through that loss, and who I am is different than the roles I fulfill. One of the concepts I started to become aware of was in the smallest of interactions, how I would tend to try to prove something or hide something. The example would be, let's say that I'm loading the dishwasher and my wife isn't noticing. So what am I doing? Why am I really doing the dishes? Well, now we've been married 19 years this summer, so you would think you get past some of these things. But I'm doing the dishes and she's not noticing, so I just start clanking them louder. And by clanking them louder, I'm revealing the real motive of why I'm doing this. I'm trying to prove to her, right? So she'll say to me, "Oh, thank you, honey." And whether it's the big or the small moments, if you can learn to tune that antenna, why am I doing this? Am I doing this to get something comforted or validated about my identity? Or am I truly doing this to give? And when that antenna tunes in, whether it's a company decision, how somebody is leading a meeting, because so much of our space is in the workplace and in businesses, to the employee coaching session they're having with somebody, to the future hire they're making and they're trying to interview that person, this proving or hiding antenna as a baseline has been huge, because there's a movie playing in our heads and we don't even know it, and we're showing up to encounters basically saying, "Will you please validate me? Will you validate the existential despair I feel?" And when we dial into that, it is terrifying at first, but we learn to go, "Oh, I don't have to be here for me. I can give something from a secure core." And I just keep coming back to that. Not over that idea yet.
Any questions? We've got just a couple minutes for questions.
I hope we can touch on this subject, but imposter syndrome, when you're an entrepreneur or in any profession, you're doing something and you're trying, you're supposed to be an expert in your field, and you absolutely don't feel like you deserve to be where you are. What do you do in that situation? How do you move past it? Or how do you move through it?
You say, "I don't know." And that's a really big thing, because again, it's the big thing with the mental health, we make people feel inadequate for being real. And that's the best thing, is you say, "I don't know." Because the one thing in mental health that I've also found that really got me the hardest, doctors, therapists, all these people, they should have said, "I don't know," because they didn't know. And so one of the big things is that when you show up authentically and just actually say, and I'm still learning, I'm growing with it, I'm doing the next best thing, that opens so many doors. Because the other thing that always happens when I say, "I don't know," the other person goes, "Me too." And it actually turns out hardly anybody knows what they're doing. Is the biggest thing, especially in mental health, hardly anybody knows what they're doing. And so that's the thing, is that honesty actually tends to be the best answer in that.
It made me think of Michelle Obama's new book. She talks about, "I've been at the smartest tables in the world, and they don't know what they're doing." And it's super encouraging. It's not everyone feels the imposter syndrome, people that feel the imposter syndrome think everyone feels it, but in our work with people we know, there's a certain segment of people that do. And those that do are usually trying to achieve some level of mastery in their field before they show up, so no one will ever point at them and go, you don't know what you're doing, you don't have what it takes, you're a sham. And when you can learn to almost like, and this is a technique like samurai warriors would use, they would picture their battle before, they would picture their death before going to battle, because they wanted to come home alive. And by picturing that, they would let it lose its power. And so it's almost like this thing that we're afraid of, that people are going to call us this. What if they do, right? Then what? We're going to keep going and learning. And so there's a lot more to be said about it. But for those that feel it, it's emotion, it's a process, more than just you're going to finally get over that feeling.
One more question?
So I guess all you guys are entrepreneurs and dealing with maybe the emotional, this is kind of more emotional health and mental health question. But you're probably also responsible, like, or impacting the emotions, not only of the people you work with and the people in your company, but maybe even your personal relationships, and being in like a startup, like emotions can run high. So how do you balance all that, like keeping your own emotions stable while knowing that like you need to take on some of that stuff from other people as well?
So I'm guilty of, from time to time, being a real, and I was told not to curse, so we'll say jerk.
Who told you that?
It's happened. It's something which I'm not proud of, but there have been situations where I have allowed myself to be put in a position where I was walked on and I was taken advantage of. And it's really hard when that happens to rise above and care about somebody else's feelings. It's a point where it's like a late night, dude, you really suck kind of thing. And this is something which I've grown from, but it really just keeps going back to remembering, like, if you were in that position where we've all sucked at some point in time, and some of us can hide from it and some of us build things around it, but you don't want that person to hit you up in the middle of the night and ruin your evening from something which mattered to them. But there was a moment about 2 years ago where we were in a business deal and we were talking about buying a building, and the person we were negotiating with really sucked. And they kept monopolizing the time of myself and some partners and coming in and just not being very awesome. And I had to remember not to fight against this person, but a buddy of mine who actually may come, it's Dodson in the back, had to sit them down and tell them not that they were wasting our time, but that they were looking at the situation wrong. It was not the worst case scenario that our time was wasted, or that their employees didn't get paid, or that they got sued. The worst situation would be if they were negligent in the work that they were doing, someone's going to take that elevator up, that elevator is going to snap, and someone's going to die. And that was a big moment where I was able to step back and say, the things which I think suck are not as important as like the bigger picture. And so by helping someone, they can get better and they're not going to suck as much.
Real quick, this is one thing. If you are a business person, here's the answer. I said to one of my clients one time, I said, no one worries about the boss. Get support. Because like I work with people and I have friends, and sometimes I'll say, I'm like, I had a really hard session today and I need to cry. Like, this is sad. The world is sad. Even though I don't believe that all the time, but in that moment I did. And I have my support. So I never ever think, I believe in what I do. So I believe that people need support. And if you run a business, have support. And that really is the number one thing people forget, that just because you're a master at what you do, even masters have masters.
Can I just build on that point right there. This is something I've been thinking about the last month, is when you grow up, you have teachers and you have coaches. And these people are dedicated to you every single day to make you grow. And then we get to college and we have professors and the line blurs and you're like, okay, don't ever go to class, so like what are they doing? And then you go into the real world and you have managers, but a manager's job is to deliver on a product or to deliver whatever their role description is. It's not to help you grow. And so then I've found, well, I would say hopefully managers do some of that. But I've found that it's really, really necessary once you get into the professional world to find someone to coach you, to find someone to help you. And that's something I think Reed, he's done with Rise, is bringing people together, even in a casual setting, just to be a support group. So you can, do that with your friends. You can go get counseling. A lot of those things cost money, and not all of us have a ton of money. So I welcome the idea of brainstorming how we can get better ways of supporting and getting mentorship without the sky-high costs of actual counseling and therapy.
Awesome. Well, let's thank our panelists. We need to move on to the next one.
Panel, let's give a round of applause to Reed and everybody, Rachel. That was awesome.
So this panel is Invest in Mental Health, why and how we should invest in mental health in the workplace and beyond. So we're looking to highlight some of the reasons why people are investing in mental health, whether that's in perhaps hospitals in innovative ways or around new technologies that are emerging or in the workplace, and then some of the ways that people are doing that. And everybody here is participating in that ecosystem in some way, so it'll be exciting to hear from them. And we can just start off by introductions. What's your name? What are you doing?
Hi, I'm Mo. I'm the CEO at U. I'm a sophomore at The Ohio State University studying neuroscience and physics. My company's technology revolves around non-invasive deep brain stimulation. If you guys know what deep brain stimulation is, surgical procedures used for various pathologies, including Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, major depressive disorder. It's extremely effective. However, it's very invasive and very expensive. So I replicate the effects of the surgery from a non-invasive device that costs 2 magnitudes less. And we're looking to do clinical trials for various neuropsychiatric disorders.
That's awesome. My name's Ryan. I'm leading a startup called Bonifier, and our mission is to alleviate the fear, anxiety, and loneliness experienced by kids who are living with a life-altering illness.
Hi, my name's Kara Kearns. I'm Director of Business Development at ScriptDrop. We're a healthcare IT company with a mission to reduce patient abandonment of prescriptions. So as a healthcare company, we're doing some really interesting things and making sure our employees are well too. Pardon me.
Hi, I'm Mary Ellen Voigt, and I'm with Journey to Hope. I came up from Cincinnati after talking with Reed. We provide coaching and support groups for people that are undergoing life transitions, whether it's emotional, spiritual, physical, or financial. People go through different things in their lives, and these are not self-led, but led by people who have actually experienced a transition, whether it's caregivers, medical like diabetes or Crohn's colitis. We also have grief, and then we have a whole series of job search for those that are unemployed having to do that. It's shared in a group setting, and it's free or very little cost to those in the community to try to improve their well-being.
I'm Susan Lair, and my company is Balance EAP. EAP is often confused with EPA, AEP. EAP stands for Employee Assistance Program, and we are an employee assistance provider. This is a non-medical companion benefit to medical insurance. It is free mental health counseling, legal and financial consultation and referral, work-life balance solutions that's employer paid for the employee.
I'm Kenton, and I'm Executive Director of Mental Health America here in Franklin County. And one of the main things that we do is combat stigma around mental illness. So that's what's so cool about this evening. Because what we long for is the day when we'll feel as comfortable talking about schizophrenia and bipolar disorder and depression as we do about cancer and diabetes and heart disease. We're really longing for that day.
Right, so let's dive right in. Why should we invest in mental health? How does this impact everybody around us?
Sure. So one of the things that we all realize is what impact a workplace has on our mental health. So in 2017, the Department of Labor statistics said that we spend on average about 6.5 hours a day, 7 days a week, so it's longer during the work week, at work. And that's only second to the time we spend taking care of ourselves, which is 9 some hours, which includes sleeping. Another study said that we spend about 33% of our work week at work. So there's no doubt that what happens to us at work really impacts our mental health. So let me just ask everybody by a show of hands, and I'm going to give you 3 choices. You can say whether you're not satisfied, just satisfied, or more than satisfied. So those of you who are working right now, how many of you would say that you're not satisfied with your work experience? Anybody? Okay, we got a few. All right. How many of you say you're just satisfied? How many are more than satisfied? All right, cool. So those of you who are not satisfied, just if 2 or 3 of you could say, what are the things that make your workplace not satisfying to you? Anybody?
I'll talk to some things that made older workplaces of mine not satisfying. So lack of autonomy, feeling kind of shut down when I was trying to take on new projects, and then having an environment where literally sitting at your desk until 8 p.m. was the best judge of how you were doing versus your actual output.
Okay, great, thank you. Anybody else? 1 or 2 more things. Okay, on the flip side, those of you who said you're more than satisfied, what are the things that make a workplace really satisfying?
Okay, so, oh, that's loud. What makes my job satisfying is I just quit my other job and I'm a personal stylist, so I love styling. So that's what makes it so satisfying because I love what I do right now, so yeah.
Yeah, great, thank you. Anybody else?
I saw Nick raise his hand.
We're doing satisfying, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so one thing that makes my job satisfying is working with really smart people that challenge me to kind of raise my personal bar.
Okay, great, thank you. So as an organization that specializes in mental health, we realized that workplaces need a lot of help in understanding what can make it mentally healthy for the people who work there. And there's no doubt that the organizations and businesses that have mentally healthy staff make better products and make more money, and their retention is much better. So we went about creating a science-based and data-driven system that we could go into any organization or business and give them an idea of what their employees were telling them about what it's like to work there. So it's something that we call Ocumetrics, and I have some flyers back there if anybody's interested in seeing what it is. So we did a bunch of academic research and identified 10 different dimensions of what makes it for a good workplace. And those dimensions are the kinds of things that have already been talked about. We look at supervisor support, colleague support, how emotionally exhausted you are, what kind of, or how the organization manages change. So there are 10 of those altogether. And we have 56 questions or variables around those. So we do a survey with all of the employees at a business. And then we do follow-up focus groups with them just to have conversations to hear how things are going. So we're able to look at the data, do regression modeling to show what predictors are of turnover and job satisfaction, and really come up with a data-based response to that, to the leadership of that organization about what they can do to move the needle on some of their issues. So we've had really good success, reducing turnover rates and saving organizations a lot of money. And the greatest part of it is then we're helping those organizations create environments that are mentally healthy for the people who work there, so that when they go back to their families and go back home, they're much better off than they would be otherwise. And just to say that about 15 years ago, I was on the complete flip side of this. I was a leader of an organization and created unintentionally such a toxic environment that I got fired from my job. So now I get to work out of a place where I'm leading an organization, and I'm proud to say we have a really healthy work environment, and all of our employees talk about doing that. So just here to say you can have a healthy workplace if your management prioritizes that, and there are things that can be done to move the needle on it.
Thank you.
So it's interesting that you say that because Journey to Hope conducted a research study because there's other baggage that comes to work with the person that works, which influences your productivity and your overall well-being. People bring their invisible backpacks loaded with stuff all the time. Not sure if many of you in the audience, since you're on the younger side, but some of us that are on the older side experience this now, whether you're caring for a loved one, you've gone through grief, you've gone through a job change, or you're starting with some illnesses, whether it's you've discovered you have diabetes or Crohn's colitis. All those things weigh on you as you're coming to work and do not allow you to be the most productive you are. So we conducted some research to see if some of the programs that we offer to get you through these transitions have an impact. We used a validated instrument called Psychological Capital, which measures hope, resiliency, optimism, and efficacy. And we found that coming from our program, the beginning to the end of any one of the programs had about a 10% increase in psychological capital, which can then be equated to productivity, reduction in absenteeism, longer care for people that you're caring for. And that can be equated to an economic impact, at least in the Cincinnati area where it was done, to $2,822 per person. So can you imagine going into your work environment and being able to offer these life transition programs that would allow that person to get through, navigate, have the tools to be able to come out on the other side and be able to be more productive, in addition to coming into their most effective and great working environment that they're at.
Awesome.
Great.
Thank you. Susan, could you share the tagline of your business and how that relates to what Mary Ellen was just saying?
We help solve the challenges people bring to work. And your chuckle tells me that you know what I'm talking about. Everybody brings stuff to work. So you have a relationship issue going on at home and you don't get a good night's sleep. You show up to work and you're dragging. You've got a young kid who is afraid to go to school, being bullied. You've got that on your mind. If you have an elderly parent who is out of state, you are not certain how it's going, well, that's on your mind. And you might be at work doing the research to find a facility for your older parent or a counselor for your young child. That takes up time at work. And so employers know that to support their workforce to be productive and engaged, it is worth the money spent to purchase an employee assistance program. And how this works is it's free, paid by the employer, and the employee calls. The employee calls and says, I think I need to see a counselor. Well, we have a panel of counselors. Someone would call and say, my parents are in Florida. They moved there several years ago. It was great then. It's not now. They're not going to come back to Columbus, and I can only take off Thursday and Friday. So they can offload that to us, and we'll find them locations for their parents in assisted living and say, these are 3 options for you, and they're waiting for your call. So again, we solve the problems or the challenges that people bring to work.
Thank you. Kara, I'm interested in your perspective on how you've seen these types of services within ScriptDropped.
Yeah, absolutely. We don't necessarily have all of these services in place yet as a smaller organization, but one thing that we have done a really good job of is just making sure that, taking things to work isn't always necessarily being at work. So trying to make sure that, for one, employees can work remotely if they need to. I've had coworkers tell me, sometimes it's hard to leave the house in the past, and knowing that that's an option for folks can make a big difference. Even things like, I don't want to come into work till 9:30 because I know I don't work as well until 9:30 and I can stay later. Those pieces of flexibility are really important to make sure that everyone feels happy and comfortable where they work. Also giving them time to do things like go and help their parents if they need to go out of state. In addition to kind of the normal time off, we currently have one additional day a month that you're required to take to either work on something in your other pieces of your life, just relax for the day, and the ultimate goal of that is to work toward a 4-day work week, so there is more flexibility to help working mothers and help folks who may have other responsibilities that they do carry with them every single day.
And what are some of the innovations outside the workplace that we're working on? And how are you measuring your impact? If that's not too hard of a question.
No, so I guess to back up a second, so what I'm working on does not impact the workplace at all, but it could impact all of you. So by a show of hands, how many of you have ever been a child before? All right, so there's 2 people asleep. So what we're working on is we're helping children, right? And what we've uncovered is that there are more than 1.7 million kids each year treated in the U.S. As an inpatient, right? That's a lot of kids. And unfortunately, more than 2/3 of those children don't receive any type of clinical mental health support at all in conjunction with their physical disease. And the third, actually it's less than a third, that do receive at least some clinical support receive just that. It may not be the optimal amount. It just means they've seen a psychologist at least once. So you've got more than 1.1 million kids who are left alone to basically grapple and sort through the emotions that come with living with some sort of major disease, whether that's cancer or sickle cell or you name it, right? And so that's what we're working to address. And there are studies out there that show, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the ACE study. It was done in the 80s. It's kind of making a resurgence now, the adverse childhood experience. And it shows that these adverse experiences, they don't just affect children now while they're young, right? But if you score high enough, it actually it follows you throughout the rest of your life, even as an adult, into actual physical ailments, as well as a cultural drag on society. I don't know if that answered your question, but you know.
So I think that's a great question. Whenever I take an approach to solving anything, I try to embrace the 2 dualities of nature, which is like both the physical one and the metaphysical one. A lot of these mental health issues arise from several different types of variables. One of them most centered around the identity of an individual and how that was collected through several different events and values throughout their time, both in predictions of their futures, what I'm going to do in the workplace tomorrow, and how the past, my childhood, influenced me right now. Also, when you look at it, you have to bring it down back to the base state. How does the brain and how does consciousness arising from the brain, how does identity arise from the brain? What are the fundamental principles of the brain that we can modulate or innovate upon so we can then transcend and affect the features that are really esoteric to us, which is that our mind and our identity. So when it comes to innovation, I try to look at these 2 approaches. So the kernel in trying to innovate anything in neuroscience comes down to the electrical nature of the brain and how the brain has fundamental forces behind it that are analogous to the fundamental forces on you pushing upon a ball or electricity flowing through a cable. Deep brain stimulation and all these different neuromodulation and neural stimulation techniques affect those fundamental features. In fact, what we see from these pharmaceutical companies is that we see these complex drugs coming to market that are they're affecting subcomponents of the brain but not targeting those fundamental principles. Therefore, because it's affecting those large targets, we're not really issuing the root of the problem. Modulating anything on the root of the problem affects everything above it. So when we look at it, we can provide a mathematical framework and how we can identify several of these variables and how they affect our mental health. Looking at each one as a function of time, we see that as I spend my day collecting through work, dealing with my manager, dealing with my friends, the coworkers over there, it's affecting, let's say, 60 to 70% of my day. But then you can extrapolate that and talk about the history of the individual and look at other variables, how those arise from childhood traumas or childhood abuse. And that function of time is much higher than the one that's coming from the workplace. It's needless to say, every single one of these variables and their characteristic component with how time affects it is very important. When I try to innovate, I try to find a thing that affects it as an extension of an infinite time, or one where it's at the beginning all the way to the end, so it can affect all these different principles from the smallest scale all the way to the largest one.
Awesome. Thank you. Questions? More? Any questions from you guys? Go back here, and then I'll come back.
Thank you. I was just thinking about the EAP program. I have one at work, but I have never used it, and I'm curious, what percentage, is there research that you're aware of, what percentage of employees on average utilize the EAP, and is there research that shows how to increase that?
Utilization for the counseling component of the EAP is 2 to 5% in the workplace. It won't surprise you to hear me say that it is human nature that when we hit a bump in the road, that we tough it out and we work through it. We talk to our friends, we talk to our family, we have our own support groups, and we move through it. That's what most people do. Mental health professionals will say that if you ask for the help from a mental health professional, you'll get through it faster. So our employers, what they will say is, you know, we're glad we've got it. It's in our back pocket. And I'm going to give you an example. After the Parkland shootings a year ago, we have seen an uptick in parents of teenagers calling to get their kids into counseling. Here's a real example. The school called a mother and said, you're going to have to come and get your son. We're not going to let him go home. He has a suicide plan. He's going to jump off a bridge. He's going to tell you that he loves you, and you're going to have to come get him because we're not going to let him go home. So she took him to Children's Hospital, and then that was the moment when she was glad that her company provided her an EAP. She didn't know what to do, but she called us. We got her son into counseling, and they made a plan for how to navigate this. So companies will recognize and articulate that, okay, so maybe utilization for the mental health counseling is not a lot, but having it in our back pocket is worth having. And I would say to you that our particular innovation is that we now price it for the small business employer, 2 to 50, because everybody's got the same issues. And if you are a small business employer and somebody comes to work and they've got a problem, they come right to you, the business owner, and they want to tell you about it. If you're a landscaper and somebody is taking off work, you might be planting the trees that day.
Kenton, is there anything that you've found in your work with Ocumetrics around John's question of increasing utilization for these types of services?
Well, some of the organizations we work with have EAPs and some don't. Usually it just comes down to HR and what kind of support they provide. So for example, there was a large behavioral health employer in Cincinnati with over 800 employees that we worked with. And one of our recommendations to them was to really improve their whole HR function. So they assigned like an HR person to each line of business that they had. So all the employees were supposed to know who their HR person was and they could go to them for help. So that's just one of the examples of something that can help turn an organization around. It didn't have directly to do with EAP, but that's just one example that we found.
One of the interesting statistics that I think about a lot, there was a study around, I think it had about 30,000 different employees from various industries, various work environments, and they found that of the percent that do have a mental illness, 80% of the respondents to the survey cited that workplace stigma and shame prevented them from accessing the services that were provided. So one of the innovations that we're working on with RISE is providing opportunities regardless of illness for people to work on their mental health. We're trying to say that you don't have to have a problem to work on your mental health. This is something that is just a key component of being a human. You're going to go through developmental changes, stressors in your life, and we want you to have support and opportunities anywhere along that way to have those opportunities. So we had another question. You still have a question?
Yeah, it was about EAP, so if you want to go into a different topic.
Any more questions?
If you turn growing a company into just a mathematical equation, when you have one or two people at the company, it's much more simple on mental health. Maybe it's you go out and grab beers and you can chat with that person. As you add additional people, that permutation gets more and more complex. How would you advise companies to understand the kind of dynamics of mental health and being able to accommodate the entire team as you shift from 2 people, which that's much easier, to 20, 40, 60, up to 200, ensuring that everyone has that type of support that they ultimately need?
Yeah, that's a great question. So whenever I try to work in my company, I try to take a decentralized approach. So obviously with 2 people, you have 2 variables. It's a very easy equation. But when you expand upon it, you have 600 people, 600 variables. It becomes a lot more complicated. So I guess you can describe it with a graph theoretic approach, in which you can describe every single one of these people on a point on a graph, and then, or one of these industries or one of these effects, and how they're all interconnected with one another. What you look at is you look at that one point and you see how closely connected is it with the second one, or how closely connected it is with another one. Then you can use a probability distribution function. So you look at these points and see and try to group them into clusters. Amazon, Microsoft, Apple, and these large conglomerates like to push their company that way, in which they have smaller reps across several different industries inside their company, all across the United States or internationally, and each one is its own hub. And every single hub has its own quote-unquote quasi-CVO, or their own type of leader that guides that. And then when you go down to the smaller and smaller scale, you look at that a bit more. You have the HR rep for that little community. That's a way you can mitigate that.
One of the simple answers we give to people is that you want your employees to feel valued. So no matter whether there's 1 or 2 or there's 600, they have to feel valued. And one of the real key ways to feeling valued is feeling listened to. So just find ways to listen to the employees and what they have to say and what's important to them. There's a concept that a counselor named John Gottman, who has his own counseling method, developed, and he's able to predict divorce real accurately. And one of the things he looks at is something called positive sentiment override, which says we have so many positive experiences with each other that when the hard times come, we're ready to give each other a break and realize that we can work through it. So we encourage employers to build up that PSO, or that positive sentiment override, so that their employees will go along with them. And those are touchy-feely kinds of things, but they're real practical ways that you can build up feeling valued, feeling listened to, and developing that positive sentiment override, whether there are 2 people or 600.
One thing that sounded really cliche at the time, but I did appreciate in a previous role was at the beginning of a meeting with your manager, you would just say your best and worst of that week. And it could be personal, it could be work related, but it's kind of a nice reminder that there is a person on the other side. They have a life outside of the organization, and that alone can really help build, trust and rapport with that person and their manager, which can then kind of permeate throughout.
All right, well, that's all that we have time for. Thank you, everybody, for joining on the panel. It's awesome to have so much experience and so many innovative ideas represented on our panel. And I really appreciate everybody coming to be here, especially Mary Ellen, who drove 90 to 120 minutes to be here.